Hello and welcome to Moment Photography. My name is Ross and I've been a professional photographer since 2006 now. You may have seen that I've already got a few videos on this channel, but I am very new to YouTube. So you could call this my first foray into the world of YouTube videos. So please be kind in the comments. But for this video, I thought I would talk about some of my kit. Okay, yes, not terribly original, but maybe I can think of some ideas later of things I want to put into future videos. So for this video, I'm going to talk about my telephoto lens, which is a 70-200 Canon lens, which I have down here. Here we go. So this says this is a professional quality lens. Now that may go without saying really, because I'm a professional photographer, but quite honestly you can use lenses which aren't considered professional and still get really good results. But usually the more you spend on a camera product, the better results you'll get and the easier it is to get the results that you want. But you can get by with something of lesser quality, well, not lesser quality, lesser cost. So this is the Mark II version. This is the 70-200 2.8 L IS Mark II, and the L, some say flippin' L, it's expensive, but the red ring tells you that it's a pro level lens, which this is, and the IS is for image stabilization. Now I'm sure there's a lot of professional photographers who are watching this and like, yeah, well, state the obvious. So this is maybe not aimed at you necessarily, but maybe there are people out there who you know, are building up their kit and are thinking, you know, should I get a professional quality lens? Is it really worth it? Should I get something cheaper? Should I stick with what I've got? Whatever. So all I'm going to do really is, rather than this be like a completely thorough review and trying to be the best review out there, because I know there's lots of people who do really great reviews on camera kit, I just wanted to give my experience as a working professional. I know there's a lot of people out there who are enthusiasts and they'll talk all about kit, but they won't actually necessarily use it for clients' work. So I use this a lot for the work that I do. I probably do mainly school photography, but I've done over 125 weddings. I've done family portraits, all sorts of things. So this is basically my experience of using this lens and what I think of it, if I think it's worth the money, the experiences I've had, problems I may have had, that sort of thing. So as I said, this is the Mark II version, and I did have the Mark I as well. Now, quite honestly, I don't think I really saw much difference at all. I think that, I can't remember now, sorry, I think the difference, I can find this out and put it in the description, but I think the difference, one of the main differences was that this has got a fluorite element or something like that. It's got some sort of special expensive element inside, which apparently, you know, is going to give you clearer pictures. I mean, I think you really have to be like pixel peeping to see the difference, but when I got this one, I didn't really see a huge difference, so I probably could have stuck with the Mark I version, to be honest. But most commonly this is used for if I want to get photos, well, obviously of things that are far away, but it's what scenarios you would use that in. So when it comes to weddings, maybe I want to get some candid pictures of people chatting away after the wedding ceremony, you know, they're drinking a glass of champagne or something. And I mean, I can't really hide myself with a great big camera and a huge lens, but I can at least distance myself and give people some personal space whilst I'm taking the photos with this lens. So if I was going to be taking pictures of people at a distance, you know, they're going to see me, so I'll just sort of be polite and respect their boundaries and maybe say hello or something, and you know, and then I've kind of broke the ice a bit then, so then I can carry on taking my photos. But also, as I said, I do a lot of school photography, and I do sort of stage photography, so you know, people doing their acting rehearsals, and I may need to zoom in, you know, without disturbing them while they're doing a rehearsal. I need to zoom in and get some action and what's going on. And also because it's very dark in a theatre, I need a lens which can cope with you know, very dim lighting, and the focusing, you know, you need to be able to cope in that lighting too. So those are a couple of scenarios that I would use this lens for. It's obviously also very suited to sports photography because it's a 2.8 lens, so it's got a very large aperture, and that, I think that helps with the speed and accuracy of the autofocus. It is quite a heavy lens. I think it's like around about 1.5 kilos, whatever that is in pounds, I don't know, sorry. But I think it's like, is it 2.2 pounds to a kilo? So yeah, it's quite a heavy lens, but it's heavy because it's metal. It's got some big chunky glass elements in it. It's really solidly built. I think I've had this like about 3 or 4 years, maybe even long now, you know, time flies. But I've never had any problems with it. It's just pretty bomb-proof. Well, maybe I wouldn't drop it, but it's pretty durable, you know, it rattles around in my bag a bit, and I don't think I've actually ever sent this away to be you know, tweaked or calibrated or anything, because it's always just served me really well. It's always just held together really well. Whereas 1 or 2 other lenses I have had to send away because the focus was a bit off or something broke inside and had to be fixed. But this one has just been fantastic. So it's a very durable lens, but it is a heavy lens. So you're really going to feel it when you put this in your bag. Because the thing is, let's face it, you're not going to have just one lens in your bag, you're going to have a number of lenses, and this is going to make a huge difference to the overall weight of your bag. One thing recently that I noticed about this lens, well, not noticed about this lens, but a comparison that came to my mind. I was visiting some relatives in London, and I didn't have this lens with me at the time, and I wanted to go to some places where I felt that it would have been very beneficial to have this lens with me, but you know, I didn't. But because I was staying with family, I was able to borrow a Canon zoom lens, which wasn't a pro lens. I think it was something like 100 to 300 millimeters, and as I say, it wasn't a pro lens, so it was a lot lighter, which I certainly appreciated because I did a lot of walking that day, you know, probably like 5 miles or more, and carrying around this all that time would have been very uncomfortable. So it was a bonus that I didn't have that weight, but it was also great that I had the focal length that I wanted to get the photos I wanted. So when I used that particular lens, it was, so as I say, it was a Canon lens, I think it was 100 to 300, and I went to this park in London, I think it was actually Crystal Palace Park, I think it was, and in this park they've got these dinosaurs that have been there for decades. I mean, I remember them when I was a kid, and I wanted to take a few pictures of these dinosaurs that are in this kind of lake area, and so I was using my uncle's lens, and I apologise in advance, Uncle, I might not be that favourable about your lens, but anyway, I got some really nice sharp images, but the difference, or what struck me, was how when you're zooming in and out, it wasn't as smooth as using this one, and because it didn't have image stabilization as well, that was another issue. But yeah, there's the jerkiness the jerkiness was more, it just didn't feel as nice, but it didn't affect the image quality. But the lack of image stabilization did mean that I had to be, you know, very steady with my hands, whereas with this one, you know, you've got that image stabilization and you can keep it very steady in the frame because it helps correct any shakes that you've got in your hands. So that was a couple of differences, and the build quality of the lens, you know, because it is lighter, it's much more plastic, I imagine probably the lens elements would have been smaller, because I think that was something like a f5.3, or no, f5.6 is 6.3 probably, something like that. So it didn't matter in that scenario necessarily because I was outside, you know, there was enough daylight, but if I was inside I would have had to really, you know, crank up the ISO in order to use that lens, and that would have, you know, had all sorts of effects on the quality of the images. So that's a few things for you. Now, when you are using the image stabilization on this, there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One is that when you are holding down the button to, you know, focus on your camera, it takes a second or so for the image stabilization to kind of lock in. So one thing I've really learned over the years, or just reminded myself over the years, is just say to myself, right, you know, I need to wait until the image stabilization has locked on before I take the picture. I think it's very easy to just focus and immediately take the picture, but if you're in a situation where it's quite dim lighting, you may have focused but the image stabilization is still catching up. So you want to take the picture and then you're, you know, waving around, obviously not this much, but you're waving around very slowly, very slightly with the lens, and the image stabilization hasn't caught on properly, and then you've got a shaky image. And I've lost like loads of images that way because I haven't sort of mentally said to myself, hang on a minute, make sure that that image stabilization is really locked on. And I think with this one it's not too bad, but I've got a Canon 100 to 400 millimeter L lens as well, and that's got image stabilization, but I think that one takes slightly longer than this one. I think this one's a bit quicker, but that's a major thing because that can make a huge difference to your photos. I mean, if you've got image stabilization and you're not doing this, you're not making sure that that image stabilization has locked in, then you might as well just not have it because you're, you know, losing photos. The other thing is that with the image stabilization, you want to make sure that you turn that off when you're on a tripod, because they're going to fight each other basically. So you want to have that off, because I mean, you don't need it on a tripod anyway, and if you have it on, you know, it could actually try and fight against that tripod and cause you bad images. Now, you may or may not have noticed that on this side of the lens I've got a piece of gaffer tape. Now, the reason for that is that, you know, I'm taking my photos and I've got my hand supporting the lens, and my thumb, see, is around about here. And a number of times I've been in a scenario where, especially if I'm doing sports photos, you know, I'm scrabbling around trying to get the pictures I want, trying to be here, there and everywhere, trying to change my settings all the time, be aware of the changes of the environment, and in that rush and haste, it's very easy to knock a switch. And, you know, I'm always careful to take the photos that I do and try and be aware of my surroundings, but sometimes things can kind of overwhelm you and you can overlook things. And if you've merely overlooked one switch that's being knocked and you haven't realized, you could be, you know, taking your photos and not realizing that actually, you know, you've turned off the autofocus, or you've turned off the focused range or something like that, and that can mess up your photos. You can miss shots. I mean, you're likely to notice it fairly quickly, but you could have knocked it at a crucial time. So it's just not worth the risk. So I've put this on here, and it covers up the image stabilization switch. And actually I need to replace this tape, I think. And there's also another one here which is stabilization mode. So there's two modes, and one of those modes is for this kind of motion, which is the most typical motion. So obviously this is exaggerated, but if I'm holding my camera like this and I'm shaking around like this, you know, it's gonna correct for that. But in mode 2 is if you are panning. So if I'm watching a race car go across, you know, I can pan across, and the stabilization is more designed, I believe, for panning shots. So I almost all the time have mine set to 1, and the stabilization is almost always on. Like I say, I might have it on a tripod, and then I turn it off. But these days, you know, cameras are so great with dealing with high ISO, and I don't really tend to do landscapes much. So there's so few times where I feel like I need to have the camera and this lens on a tripod, that I just tend to leave it on most of the time. But I would turn it off obviously if I was using a tripod. And then at the top here we've got this range switch. Now this is so if you're mostly photographing something relatively close to you, then you're going to have it on the you're going to have it on the, there's two ranges. One, I think one's for reasonably close to infinity, and the other one is for things a bit further away to infinity. So I think it means, so if you're photographing something which is, you know, fairly far away, then you put it on the 2.5 meters to infinity, and then it means when you're sort of moving about, it's going to keep locked on something which is fairly far away and not try as hard to focus on something closer, and that means it's going to be quicker and more accurate with the focus. So I tend to have mine on 1.2 meters to infinity because that's most of the time. You know, I'm not always, or I'm probably mostly taking pictures of things which can be quite close and far away, rather than things that may be mostly far away. And as I said, I mentioned about this on a tripod. Now you have got this tripod mount here, which you can actually take off. Got this little quick release, and I think this one you kind of turn it around and then it slides off. Now generally I don't actually have this on because, like I say, I don't really tend to use it on a tripod anyway. It can be good, I suppose, in the fact that you can kind of use that as an extra support when you're holding your camera here, but it does add a bit of extra weight. So generally I tend to have it off because it's not really necessary if I'm not going to use it on a tripod. But if you are going to use this lens on a tripod for whatever use that is, you definitely want to have this on, because otherwise your tripod is here, and then you've got a lot of leverage of the lens trying to fall forward, so that's going to put more pressure on your tripod. Now if you've got quite a cheap tripod, for example, it's going to really pull down and probably, you know, risk sort of camera shake as it's sat on there. If you've got a more expensive, very solid tripod, it's less likely so, but you still want to reduce, you know, or minimize any potential shake or stress on the tripod. So, you know, that's why you've got it here basically. So you're much more centered with the weight of your camera and your lens. Now this is a very fast lens. Fast in that it's a 2.8 lens, so lots of light comes in, and it's also fast in its accuracy of focusing. I mean, it's going to be faster though in good light though. As I said, I do a lot of stage photography, like theatre photography, and you can have a really, you know, fast lens, but if it's like almost pitch black, it seems sometimes, you're going to struggle. A friend of mine, he's another photographer as well, and he said to me he's done jobs where it's like the inside of a nun's pocket, you know. And recently I did a job like that where it's stage photography, and they'll have some bright lights, but they'll also have lots of dark sections too, and it can be an absolute pig trying to focus in those sort of scenarios. And it really was pushing, you know, what I could do and the camera could do. So that's when like a lens like this, you know, really does help you out. You'll still be struggling a bit, but having a wide open or having a very fast 2.8 lens is going to help. It's going to help the camera focus quicker, and it's going to help you keep your ISO down a little bit more as well. So yeah, it's definitely worth having as fast a lens as you can. The downside of that, of course, is that if you have a very fast lens, so you know, a 2.8 lens, the longer the focal length, the bigger the lens it's going to be. So this one is quite a big lens. I mean, if you took someone who wasn't a professional photographer and just was an enthusiast, or someone maybe wasn't even an enthusiast, they just like to take pictures on their phone or something, if you gave this to them, they would think, God, this is so heavy. But I mean, really, this is actually one of the baby-sized telephotos that are available out there from Canon. So as I say, this is a 70 to 200. I've already got the 100 to 400, and then when you start going into the prime telephoto lenses, like for example a 300mm 2.8. I can't remember if it's a 2.8 or a f4 400mm lens. There's a 600mm lens. I think there might be an 800mm lens. I'm not sure if once there was actually a 1200mm that's been discontinued, but there is also a 200 to 400mm lens, and it's got this, because it's got this converter in it, so it starts at f4, goes up to 400, but with the converter it takes it up to around about 560mm, something like that, and I think then it's something like 5.6, can't remember now. Now I've got a friend who is retired, and he's travelled to some amazing places around the world, gone on cruises to, I think it's the Arctic or the Antarctic, one of those two, and he's been to the Galapagos, he might have been to Alaska as well. He's been on safari once or twice in Africa, and he's got some similar kit to me, but he's got this big 200 to 400mm lens, which is, you know, fantastic if you're, you know, stuck in a jeep trying to photograph lions or something far away. You can't move, but you've got this great big long lens. Now in those scenarios, having a huge lens like that is a huge benefit. But it's interesting because you don't really understand at first when you see these lenses come out. You think, oh wow, that'd be great to have that extra length, and you know, wouldn't it be such an amazing lens? But it wasn't until one time we went to Paignton Zoo, which isn't too far away from us, and you know, we took our camera kit. He had his backpack, and I've just got like a shoulder Billingham bag, which is, I've had it for years and it's really good. And he had this 200 to 400mm lens with him, because I think I'd asked him, you know, could we take that, because I'd really like to try it out. I don't know if he would have taken it otherwise, but anyway, so we went there, we had a great day, took lots of great photos, and there was one point where I had the opportunity to try out this beast of a lens, and there were some flamingos in one of the enclosures, so I said, you know, could I have a try out this lens? So I think it does come in a flight case, but he just had it in his backpack because he had a, you know, a suitable bag for it to hold it. And you know, I put this thing on. It's not a case of you put the lens on the camera, it's you put the camera on the lens, because it's such a huge lens. So anyway, I was taking a few pictures of the flamingos, and yeah, it was an amazing lens, you know, crisp, sharp images, the focusing was quick. But it did strike me, well, you know, with the converter it goes up to around about something like 560mm, I think, and I had my 100 to 400mm zoom lens with me, and the maximum aperture on that, if I'm fully zoomed in, is f5.6, and that's not that bad really, because with my friend's lens it starts at f4, and with the converter on it goes, I think it's 5.6. So you know, they're pretty similar anyway, and it's not like you're getting a lot of extra millimeters. I guess the difference would be that, you know, you've got probably some more clarity, and it's probably going to focus quicker, especially if you don't use a converter and you're shooting at f4, and I'm having to shoot at 5.6 on my 100 to 400 millimeter lens. So bigger isn't always better, and I found that this lens and my 100 to 400 millimeter lenses, these two lenses have been just fantastic for what I want to do. You know, I don't need to be carrying around some huge flight case. They're relatively manageable in weight. You probably put on a few muscles carrying around my bag, don't mind, of all the lenses I've got in it. But so that gives you an idea of the different options that are out there and how this fits into that lineup. And you'd probably really only want to be using those bigger lenses if you were going on safari, or you were photographing birds where you don't want to be moving physically any closer to the subject that you're photographing. Now, one thing I have had to keep reminding myself of over the years that I've had this focal length of lens, so you know, both the Mark 1 version and this version, is that when you are zooming right into, say, 200 millimeters, you know, the full extent, and you want to use 2.8 because everyone just loves that out of focus background, don't they? When you do that, especially if you physically move closer to your subject as well, you're minimizing that depth of field. You're making it, you know, probably like this deep, and you only have to move the lens a tiny bit and you're going to be out of focus. And this really comes into play when you are dealing with a focusing system like this. So now this is the focusing system of my 1DX Mark II DSLR camera. So it isn't a mirrorless camera. Now, mirrorless cameras these days, they'll have focusing points all over this frame. So you know, if you want to focus on something up here, you can do that. If you want to focus something on here, you can do that. With this system, you know, which is now a few years old, I'm limited to this very central area, and that's always been a huge bugbear of mine and other photographers, that we're stuck to this central zone. So it means that you miss shots because you have to focus and recompose, and it also means that you miss shots because you, when you do that focusing and recomposing, if your depth of field is, you know, that tiny, just the movement of focusing and recomposing your frame can cause something to go out of focus, and that is so frustrating when you've got something needs to be crucially in focus. Or it could have been, you would have been an absolute killer shot, but you couldn't because of the limitations of the system. And it's kind of hard to really work around that unless you want to manually focus it, but much of the time you haven't got time to do that. So it's particularly bad if I'm shooting portrait and let's say there's something here where I want to focus, and I've got to kind of tilt the camera so one of these points is up here, and then lock the focus and tilt back. But then I may have locked the focus, but my plane of focus is slightly different when I've moved back again. So that can mean, you know, things are a little bit soft, or by the time you've recomposed and taken the shot after focusing, maybe their ear is in focus, or maybe the tip of their nose is in focus but their eyes aren't. And that is one of the limitations of having a long focal length camera and shooting wide open. And I think in my early days as a photographer, or well, before I was doing it professionally, I was blaming the lens or the camera and thinking it was back focusing or forward focusing or something. And I think at times, maybe like when I had a Pentax camera years ago, maybe it was a little bit of that. But more recently I can see that it's not so much that, it's just the limitation of these focus points being all clustered in the middle. So that's when you will come a cropper. So this isn't saying anything wrong with the lens, obviously, but it's having that limitation with the camera in combination with this lens can be very frustrating. So, you know, that's when you start to miss focus and yeah, it drives you crazy. But now in terms of cost, brand new, like when this first came out, it was probably like about £2,000, I think. May have even been more than that. I mean, I have never spent £2,000 on a camera lens. I've bought camera lenses that are worth that, but I haven't paid that. Now this one, I think I probably paid about 15 or probably between 14 and £1,600, because I've had a couple of these and I sort of vaguely remember in the back of my head that that's around about the sort of price I paid. And you could say that I've easily earned that back with all the thousands upon thousands of photos that I've taken. I mean, for example, one client of mine, I recently worked it out that in 5 years I've taken over 40,000 photos for them. That's a local private school around this area. So you think, well, you know, the revenue I would have generated from all those jobs, that, you know, pays for this very needed equipment. So I need equipment that's going to last, you know, be durable, as I said, and it's going to be reliable, so fast focusing. It's going to give me the flexibility that I need because it's a wide open aperture. So in that case, it's really worth paying for something. Even though you're paying £1,500, it's really worth paying that because you know it's not going to let you down, and it hasn't let me down. And as I said, you know, when I spoke about my uncle's zoom lens, it's great if you can accept the limitations, you know, slightly jerky motion when you're focusing, but that's not going to affect the quality of your image. It's how you use that tool, whether it, you know, even though it's slightly harder to take the photo, if you know what you're doing and how to use it, then you're still going to get good results. So I just ignored it. It was slightly jerky, and with the lack of image stabilization, then I just hold it really, really steady, or, you know, up the shutter speed to compensate for the fact that I'm getting a little bit camera shake, even though I'm being really careful, that sort of thing. So I think something like this, it's really an investment. It's going to last you for years, as it has for me. And also, when you've got something of this quality, when you eventually do go to sell it on, it's going to hold much of its value. I mean, there was a time when I bought a 400mm prime lens, and I actually sold it for a profit. I don't know, maybe I just accidentally bought it at a good time, and then when I wanted to sell it, it was at a time when they were in demand. So that was before I had my 100 to 400mm lens, before I could afford that lens, and I bought this prime 400mm 5.6 and no image stabilization. So that was one of the things that made it a lot cheaper, but it's really sharp. So now if you were like, well, I don't want to, you know, do what I did, say for example, and get that 400mm lens without the image stabilization, or I don't want to get, you know, one of these without image stabilization, there is a 200mm f4 with image stabilization, and the good thing is that that one is a lot lighter because it's f4 and it's a lot smaller. In a previous job I was using that regularly, and because they'd bought it, then, you know, it wasn't like I was, oh, I wish I hadn't got this, or oh, should I buy this, I don't know, is this a good decision? But it was a good decision. I don't think I'd used it previous to that, but when I was using it, I found the quality was fantastic. You know, this is an f4 version of this lens basically, and it just absolutely brilliant. And again, very much like with the large 200 to 400mm lens, which, you know, costs thousands of pounds and it weighs a ton and it's really bulky, you have to ask yourself, well, do I need the 2.8 version of this lens? And I would say for me, yes, I do, because as I said, I take a lot of photographs of performances on stage, and it can be very, very dark. And having that 2.8 is extremely beneficial, if not a necessity, basically, because otherwise my ISO range would just be going nuts. I mean, it already is sometimes going up to sort of 16,000 ISO during very dark performances. So I think if I was using that f4 version of this lens, even though it's a lot lighter and smaller, you know, I would be losing out by the fact that it's not such a fast lens. You know, it's a smaller aperture. But I'd say for most people, f4 for this 70 to 200 lens with the image stabilization is totally fine. I mean, you have to be in a really, really dark situation for you to be suffering with that smaller aperture. And even at times I've thought to myself, oh, you know, should I sell this one? Should I get the other one? But, you know, like I said, with that particular scenario in the theatre, I can't do that. But probably like 90%, if not more of the time, I could totally use the f4 version. I suppose the other thing is though, is that if I wanted to forget about how dark something is, if you want to really have a nice blurred out, you know, nice bokeh background, then you're going to get more of that with the 2.8 than you are with the f4. But you probably wouldn't really notice it a massive amount, actually. If I think about it, really, the difference visually would probably be fairly minimal. So I think that's a pretty good overview of my impressions of this lens. I must admit, I didn't expect me to be talking quite as much about this. I thought, oh yeah, you know, this is going to be a really short video. I'm going to be spending 5 minutes and that'll be it. It won't be long enough. But actually I've, you know, gone on for quite a long time. So I hope that what I have said in this video has been useful to you and interesting too. And I'll try and do some more videos like this, and trying to think of some other videos to do too, that will hopefully be of interest to you. I'd be really interested in hearing your feedback on this video. But again, you know, I'm a new YouTuber, so please be nice. Please do remember to give a like to this video, so it tells me that you like the video and I can continue making more videos like it, and you know, it helps the YouTube algorithm as well. Please also do consider subscribing, and if you hit the bell icon, then that will make sure that you're updated when I've released a new video. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope I've helped you at least in some small way, and I'll see you again next time.